What's good people, it's Jay Cactus, welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to be breaking down the mixing process for drill beats. This was actually by request from one of my subscribers, so I wanted to show you my process, show you a few of the techniques that I generally use when I'm mixing, and hopefully you can take something from it. But before you watch the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump straight into it. Alright, so before we start the mix, I'm going to show you what it sounds like without any mixing at all. So there's no leveling, no EQs, no compression, no panning, nothing. So I'll show you what it sounds like now.
Jay Cactus.
Alright, so you can hear straight away that everything's sounding horrible. The leveling's not right, it's sounding muddy, it's sounding clustered, nothing has its own space. So I'm going to dive straight into it and show you a few of my techniques. Alright, so the first thing that I like to do is name everything. It seems like a boring thing to do, but I like to stay organized, I like to keep everything neat, and it helps you further along the process as well, because if some of the instruments are named weird names rather than what they actually are, then it can take you a second to actually try and find them. So once you've got everything named, when you're looking at the mixer, it will just be simple. If you need to make an adjustment, you can just go to the piano quick or the lead or whatever you need. I've already named everything, but if you want to do it, then you can right click and just click rename here and call it whatever you want. And then once I've named everything, I like to arrange it in order of what I'm going to put it in the playlist. So to do this a quick way, you select the one that you want, keep hold of Alt, and then just go up or down. So I usually have my kick, my 808, then my snare, then the hi-hats. The snare 2 is acting like a bit of a perk, so I can keep them together. Open hat can go there, and then we're good. And then if you wanted to, you could also color coordinate them. So all I did there was just click and drag up and come into this drop down arrow, color selected by gradient, and then let's say for example you want the instruments in a bright color, I could do that. And then with the drums, I could put them in another color. And once you've got everything named and colored, the next thing to do is send everything to its own mixer channel. And there's a couple ways you can do this. I already have some of mine routed, so I've just reset everything. But if you wanted to, you could come here and drag up to, let's say 1, next one 2. And you could keep going, but a quicker way to do it is just double click on any of these so it highlights everything. You can come to insert one, press Ctrl, Shift and L, and now you've got everything linked up with the correct color as well. So now when I'm approaching my mix, the first thing that I usually start with is leveling. So I'll listen through to a part of the song where I've got the most elements in. Sometimes it'll be the hook if you've got all the instruments and drums playing at the same time. You just want to grab a section of the song where most of the things are playing, because that's going to be its loudest point, so that's the best point to mix it from. So as you can see in my playlist, the section with the most elements is going to be here. So I'm just going to double click and drag it to highlight this section so it's looping. And now I can listen to this and approach the mix. So the first thing I'm going to do is level everything and pan everything. They're probably the most important things that you can do in any mix. The main goal is to get everything to have its own space in the stereo field. And what that means is, a stereo field is basically, you've got one signal that's going directly up the middle, and that's called the mono signal. And then the stereo signal would be, you'd have 100% left, 100% right, and the middle, and everything else in between it. So I'm going to go ahead and level everything until I think it sounded right. And then I'll move on to panning and show you how you can give everything its own space. One thing that you should know is how the volume routes throughout the DAW. So the first point of volume is usually the channel volume, which is here. So all these dials here, they act as the volume before the instrument goes into the mixer channel and effects. So basically you'd tweak the volume here, and then the sound gets sent to all the effects here, and it goes in order. So whatever's up front will apply first, and then it works its way down. And then after all of the effects, it comes into the mixer. and this is the final point of volume. So what I like to do is do all of the volume adjustments, the leveling, before it actually gets to the mixer, because then you don't have to change these too much. And it's just a good way to practice gain staging. So I'm going to listen to everything from here and then tweak everything. Alright, so I just did some quick leveling from the dials here in the channel rack, and then I'm going to jump to the mixer so I can see everything a bit more precisely. Alright, so right now I'm happy with these levels. So the next thing I'm going to do is start panning certain elements. Now, as I mentioned before, you've got the stereo field, you've got 100% left and right, and then you've got the signal that's directly in front. So usually what you want is the kick and the 808 to go directly in front. You don't really want to pan the kick and 808, especially for like trap, drill, or just hip hop in general. You tend to find that the kick and 808 is going directly up the middle. And that's mainly because once you get a lot of low frequencies in the stereo field, it sounds muddy. So keeping everything in the center just helps to stop that muddiness. So a quick way to do that is just to go on the kick. They're usually in mono anyway, but it's good practice to have. So you can come down to the stereo dial here. 100% merged means mono. If you did it the other way, it would be completely separated. So that would spread the sound out, but you don't want that with the kick and 808. So the kick's in mono, 808 is in mono, and then everything else you can have a play with. Usually when you're using instruments from VSTs, like especially leads and pianos, you don't usually get them in mono. So you can see it by using an imager plugin like Ozone Imager. So if I have a look at the lead, you can see these sounds are already spread. So that's going from the left to right. So I might not need to pan that at all because it's already doing it within the plugin. The other trick is to make sure that everything's balanced. So if you're panning one element quite far to the left, you might want to pan something else quite far to the right, because if you've got so many things panned to one side, then the listener's ear is just going to be diverted to that one section. It's just going to sound off. So especially with perks and things like that, if you're going to pan them, try to get one to the left, one to the right. So I'll show you when I'm panning some of my perks in here. So all I did was a few minor adjustments there. I panned the open hat 30% to the left, and then I had a second snare, so I panned that 30% to the right because that's acting as a bit of a perk. And then same with the triangle and the perk. So triangle 20% to the left, perk 20% to the right. You don't always have to go by numbers as well. Just have a listen in your headphones or your speakers. Just something where you can easily distinguish the left and right channel, and then you can make your decisions then. With hi-hats, there's a few different things you can do. Usually when I'm mixing, if I'm just using one hi-hat, I'll keep it down the middle, or I might spread it a little bit. Sometimes I'll pan it just a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, depending on how the song's feeling. But With this one, I'm actually using 2 hi-hats. So I'm gonna have my main one just panned central, so it's just gonna go straight up the middle. And then with the second hi-hat, I'm gonna automate the panning. So it's gonna go between the left and right here. So I'll show you how to do that. So I've got 2 hi-hats here. I'm gonna keep this one down the middle. And then with this one, I'm gonna open a stop plugin, which is Fruity Pan-O-Matic. I'm gonna adjust the amount and the speed and set it to pan mode. And then just have a listen. I don't want it to go all the way to the left and right. I just wanna get something that's maybe like 30%, but let me take a listen. So now that I've leveled and panned everything, I'm going to move on to some processing. So I'm going to use some EQs, and I want to get the kick and the 808 just sounding nice together. That kick needs to hit hard, and it just needs to be less muddy in general. So because the kick and the 808 take up so many low frequencies, which you can see if you open a parametric EQ, let me just show you, this is the kick. So the kick's hitting around 60 Hertz. And then the 808 hits around the same area, depending on what note plays. You can see they're both taking up those sub and bass frequencies, and we can't have them both filling them up. We need them to work together. So there's a couple ways we can go about mixing them, but I'm going to start with removing some of the lows from the instruments that I'm using, because the 808 and the kick are so hard that you don't really need the low frequencies from the other instruments. So I'm going to start with the lead. I'll use stop plugins for this one. There's no set rule for this, but if you were going to pick a number, then I'd say look at everything around 100 Hertz or below. See if you can cut everything out below 100 Hertz. If you can get away with more, then you can do it. But what I like to do is just sweep it until I can hear what it's doing, and then just back off gently. Do the same for the piano. I'm also going to open another EQ for the piano and just remove some of the low mids. And then I don't always do this, but if you wanted to, you could go through each instrument and apply an EQ. But generally, if you're using good sounds, then everything's being EQ'd and compressed, so you don't generally need to mix a lot of elements if you're picking the right sounds. But if you wanted to, you could open up an EQ on like the hi-hat and the snare and see if there's any low frequencies that you can't hear that are just filling up that space without you really noticing it. So let's just take a listen. So these hi-hats, you can see everything's in the treble, which is fine. The second hi-hat, there are some low frequencies, so move them. I'm going to check the snare. See, with the snare, there are frequencies in the sub area. You don't want to remove too many lows because the low frequencies of the snare sometimes give it that thud. So be careful when you're EQing the snare. Just use your ear, see what sounds right. Another thing to look out for is when you're EQing, especially when you're removing things, you think it's not really doing anything, but how EQs work is when you're cutting things out, it adds resonance around about here where it starts to dip off. So sometimes you get a spike in dB. So you can see there, when I turn it off, only hitting around 6.7, minus 6.7 dB, but then when I turn the EQ on, it's jumping right up. And that's actually clipping now. So a way to stop that, or to get an accurate sound, is just to bring down the level here. So we were almost on minus 7 and then it jumped up. So it's actually jumped up like 7 dB. So if you're going to remove it 7 dB from the overall EQ, and you can see what sounds better. I actually think it sounds better without the EQ, so I'm going to take that off. Now, you don't really need to remove low frequencies from everything, so I'm just giving you examples of how you can do it. Just make sure that it's sounded right. I know a lot of people say just go by your ear, and when you're just starting off, it's hard to do that. You just have to train your ear the more you produce. But there's no rules to music, so in your head, if it's sounding good, then roll with it. But these are just some basic guidelines that you can follow. Generally speaking, a lot of low frequencies equals mud, so you'll remove low frequencies from some of the instruments just to give space for the 808 and the kick to hit. Now, to get the kick and the 808 working together, there's a few different things you can do. I'm sure you've seen everyone's side chaining in the video, so I'll show you how to do that. All you do is go on the kick, right click on the 808 and click on side chain to this track. And then in the 808, you're going to bring up a Fruity limiter. You're going to go to compressor, right click on side chain and select the kick. Now from here, when you play it, you just want to adjust the threshold, the ratio. So when you bring the threshold down, it's around here. The ratio is how much compression you want to apply. The attack is how fast you want it to happen, like compression to start, and then the release is how long it's going to take for the compressor to come back off. So you could do it that way. Another way, which is a bit more precise, is to do it with an EQ. And you don't actually have to have it side chained for this version to work. So I'm going to unlink that. So now what you do is open Fruity Peak Controller on the kick. Make sure that mute is off, okay? And then you're going to bring the volume down a little bit. And then in the 808, you're going to open another EQ. And now what you want to check is where the kick's hitting. So if I play this, you can see the kick's hitting at around 62 Hertz. So now in the 808 EQ, I'm going to bring the second one to around 62 Hertz. I'm going to right click here, link to controller, and then in this one, I'm going to select the peak control. I'm going to change this to inverted, and I'm going to change this to 0.5. And now when I accept it, you'll see that it is side chaining, but it's only going to duck in the low frequencies where the kick's hitting. So this is a bit more of a precise side chain compression. And that's a bit too much, so you can adjust the volume from the peak controller. Until it sounded right. Now this kick, it's obviously clipping. To me, there's nothing wrong with clipping if it's sounding good. Usually when you're clipping, it will give it a bit of like a distorted sound. And if you don't want that distorted sound on the kick, which I don't want it that distorted in this case, I'm going to adjust the volume before it gets to the mixer. Because if it's clipping before it gets here, it's still going to be clipping if I adjust the volume. It's not going to clip on the master if I bring it down, but it's just good practice to adjust the volume before it gets here. So what I'm going to do is come into the kick. You could do it from this volume, but I just want to see if I've boosted it. So I did actually boost it before here. So I'm going to bring this down. To around about there. So it's still clipping a little bit, which is fine, because on the master, I'm going to add Fruity Soft Clipper. And then usually I'll bring the post down just a little bit, and then adjust the threshold until the kick's sounding nice. So at this point you can play around with the level of the kick just until it's punching, but it's still sounding kind of clear. So I'm going to go back to my kick, I'm going to play with the volume here. And then I'd say once you've leveled everything, panned everything, done your EQs and compression, sidechain compression, then I'd move on to effects to get things sounding how you want them to sound. So for example, the 808, I think I want to add a little bit of distortion just to help it cut through on phones. When you're working with 808s, generally if there's not a lot of like mid frequencies, then it's not going to cut through on phones too much. So I'm going to add fruity fast distortion. And one preset that I like is this one. So I'm going to go on here and then I'm going to adjust the threshold and the mix level. The mix level is going to be how much of the effect you want to apply. It's going to blend in with the original signal. I'll show you what that sounds like before and after. And then after. So that's heavily distorted, which wouldn't sound good in a lot of tracks, but I think with drill, that kick in the 808 needs to cut through phones, so that's why I'm applying this much distortion. If you wanted to, you could add distortion to the snare as well, just to see how it sounds. So it makes it a bit brighter, which is fine. Now when I'm listening to the track, I just want to have a proper listen and see what's lacking in the frequency range. So instantly I'm thinking the hi-hats could maybe do with a bit of a high boost, so you could open a parametric EQ again, or you could boost the highs here. And you can hear some effects playing, which I'm going to go into in a bit because I haven't sent them to a mixer channel yet, but I'm going to do that towards the end. But I think I've got everything leveled and EQ'd right, so I'm going to go to the next part because you can see that I've got a vocal here which hasn't been touched, and I've also got effects which you can hear playing. So for the effects, I didn't link them earlier, but I can do that now. I can change this to all, and then I can see all the effects that I've got. So again, I could highlight these. I'm just going to color these quickly. So I'm going to go to a part of the song where the vocals are. So maybe here, and just loop this. You see they're way too loud. I'm going to look at the EQ too. Don't need to change anything. I just want the vocals sitting subtly in the background. If I open up an imager, you can see that this is quite wide as it is. Which is fine, that's how I want it. I want it subtly in the background but quite spread. So let me move to some of the effects that I've got. So I'll start from the beginning. I'll listen to my tag.
J Cactus.
That's fine for me. That sweep is way too loud, so I'm going to listen to that again. And that's fine there. Got a stab here. Now with some of the effects, you will find that there's a lot of low frequencies, and when they're combined with the kick and the 808 and all the other elements, they aren't really needed, they're just causing a bit of mud. So There's only a few there. With that second perk sound that I've got, I'm going to add a delay to it. I'm going to set the time to 8. Ping pong mode, so it goes from the left to right ear. I'm going to increase the pan so it's a bit wider. See how this sounds. Turn the feedback volume down and the input volume. And at this stage, when you're getting creative and you're applying all of the effects, you might want to think about reverb just to add more space. Now, what a lot of people do is just add reverb to each individual instrument, but what I like to do is create a reverb auxiliary bus, and I'll explain what that is. So I'm just going to call this reverb. I'll give it a color of blue just so I can separate my effects. I'm going to add fruity reverb. What an auxiliary send is basically a duplicate of the signal. So it's not linked to anything but the master right now, but let's say for example I wanted to add reverb to the snare. Instead of adding this reverb on the snare directly, I can send the snare to the reverb. So you just click on the snare and then click here. And that creates a duplicate of the signal, which means that you've got 100% of the dry signal, the snare, and then you've got 100% of the wet signal, the reverb. So you obviously want to turn it down. I like to do this because if you apply things directly to the instruments and you're not adjusting the wet and dry knob correctly, then you're going to wash out the instruments. Sometimes that's good. So for example, if you wanted to push something to the background, you could add it directly to the instrument and increase the wet level and decrease the dry. So then you're getting more of the reverb and it's pushing things to the back. But for this instance, the snare, I want the snare to hit still, but I want it to have the reverb as well. So I'm still getting 100% of the snare, but the reverb's going to sit with it. So now if I play a section with the snare, so you can hear it. The other good thing about doing this is reverb is basically giving each thing an environment. So if you're using the same reverb, everything's going to sound like it's in the same environment. So it's going to be cleaner. And then it's also saving CPU because you're only keeping one instance of it open rather than multiple times. So I think it's a better way unless you want to push things to the back. So the only other thing that I want to add reverb to is maybe some of the perks. This perk's already got its own reverb. Maybe some hide. Okay, so now that I've got everything mixed to where I want it, I can make a few more creative decisions. Like for example, I might do some automation. In this track, the only automation that I want to use is on the halftime that I applied. So just to keep things neat, this track here is my piano. So I'm going to right click here and click on Insert 1. And then on my piano, I didn't show you the halftime effect that I used just because that was a creative choice I made when I was actually putting everything together. That wasn't involved in the mixing process. If you wanted to add halftime, you can do it with stock plugins. You'd go to Gross Beat, you'd click on Presets, Momentary, and then Half Speed. And it's the same effect. And half speed basically sounds like this. So this is with half speed, but normal is. But when you're adjusting this level here, this is the mix knob. So this is how much of the effect you want to apply. So you can get a bit creative here. So this is 100% of halftime. If I bring this down, you can start to hear the original signal coming through. So for some parts in this track, I want it to sound like this. So I'm gonna automate the mix level here by right-clicking and selecting Create Automation Clip. And then if you wanted to keep things tidy, you could right-click here and click on Group with Above Track. So if you wanted to hide all the automation later, you could just click here. So with the halftime, I'm gonna keep it on in the beginning, but then when it gets to this point here, I want it to come off gently. So I'm gonna right-click here I'm gonna right click again and make sure it's on hold mode, so that way it's instant. And then I'm gonna bring it to maybe 70%. Okay, let me listen with everything. Then I'm gonna right click here again. A good thing to do is copy the value of this one. So right click it, copy value, right click on the next one and paste value. That way you know you're getting the same amount all the way through the section. And then you can bring it up if you need. Then it's gonna come back off. And then I could do the same for the second part, but if you wanted a quick way, you could press C to activate the slice tool. Hold shift and drag along so it's a straight line. Do the same again, so you can cut this section out, cut that one out. Then another hotkey is P, so you can right click and delete it. And then if you hold shift and drag this along, then you've copied the same halftime. So now we've got the full track mixed, and you'll notice that I didn't really do anything on the master other than soft clipper. And that's because the song's not finished. If you're making tracks for rappers, then I don't see the point in mastering the beat when you need a vocalist on there and then you're gonna have to master it again after. So for the sake of uploading beats to YouTube and BeatStars, I just do everything that I can in the mix to make it sound right, and then have a soft clipper on the master just to make sure that it's not clipping. I even see some people just leaving the master channel completely clear, no soft clipper or nothing, and they just let the kick smack through. And to be honest, if it's sounding good, it's sounding good. There's not really any rules in music. There's a few guidelines that you can stick to, especially if you're new and you're just kind of training your ear. But the key things to mixing are basically just leveling and panning. And you can see that I added a few more things just to get things sounding a certain way, like distortion and reverb. The other thing to say is most mixes are going to be different, so one thing that I do on this track isn't going to be the same for another. So just take this as some basic guidelines. I didn't go too deep into this tutorial. If you want some more in-depth ones, then let me know, because I do have other techniques that I can share. They just weren't required for this specific track and this specific genre. So I hope you took something from this video. As I said, I didn't go too in-depth today. It was just a basic guideline and just to show you my technique when I'm mixing. As you can see, the main things are just leveling and panning. You probably see that in a lot of videos, and that's because you don't really need a lot of things in a mix to make it sound good, because if you're using good sounds in the first place, then everything's EQ'd and compressed already, so you don't need to overdo it and squash everything. But if you have any suggestions for other videos and you want me to go deeper into any other techniques, then let me know in the comments and I'll hook you up with that. But for now, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.